So Paradox Interactive has brought us a number of very complicated games. I have played Crusader Kings 2 for about 20 minutes. I have watched Hearts of Iron, I believe is their other big one. Europa Universalis, I think, is one of their games. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this is Stellaris. This game is Stellaris, and Stellaris is often recommended to me at least, and talked about as being the most accessible of Paradox Interactive's games. Which I've heard as both praise and dismissal. I think that this sort of game, coming into Stellaris knowing only that these games are meant to be daunting,
to the maths.
Coming into it, I've seen that leveled as both praise and as criticism. There is a certain elitism built into complex games. You don't just see this with Stellaris. This is a fan behavior that we can see in Dark Souls. We see it anywhere that the idea of being a casual is negative. We see this in the get good mentality of video games overall, but I tend to find that the more complicated the game, the more aggressive that attitude tends to arise. Now, this isn't universally true. It's certainly not something that that everybody who is a fan of Paradox games or games like that, games with a certain level of complexity are, they're not always about that, but it's something that may, for some people, turn them off of the game. There is this learning curve that somehow tends towards keeping people away, right? People look at Stellaris either as like a great place to start. This is the appropriate choice, right? If you are a fan of Paradox games and someone's like, what game should I play? Suggest Stellaris to them if you feel it's appropriate as a great place to start. Somewhere interesting that they can learn how grand strategy works and then pull them into the larger, more complex game if they're interested in it. If you are tempted to refer to Stellaris as like baby's first strategy game for babies, Paradox game for people who don't understand Paradox games, check yourself before you wreck everything about the games that you love. Because what Paradox as a company wants is for you to play their fucking games. So I'm gonna play Stellaris. I've played a little bit of it, so this isn't a blind leap into the title screen, but I just wanted to lay some cultural groundwork because this game, and this is a challenge that I think all Paradox games are going to have in presenting the cover of their game and presenting their title screen, is the challenge of having a deep and abiding fan base that understands the massive commitment that is required to understand a game like this. There is an underpinning kind of, there's an underpinning skill set that needs to be developed and built that I feel like no title screen can adequately cover, even in the most accessible version of their model, right? So even with Stellaris, even presenting the title screen as it is, there's so much information to impart to us that no title screen could possibly ever cover it. So I think that in a way, Stellaris, like RimWorld, which we examined before, Stellaris, like RimWorld, has a challenge that I think cannot be overcome. So instead of attempting to tell us what the game is instinctively about or what the game is inherently about, what they need to do is instead impart a style. Impart a feeling or theme, which, again, difficult to do when your game is about a lot of stuff. So let's take a look at what Stellaris is telling us about itself. Let's try not to make any assumptions based on what we might already know. Let us try with a as clean a palette as we can approach this title screen. And so the very first thing when I look upon Stellaris, when I look upon this title screen, first thing I think is color palette, right? Color palette is the first thing that leaps out to me. This, as with a lot of images of space, Stellaris's screen, its title screen, is very placid and very color enriched. Like, this looks like what we imagine space looks like. Now, that's funny because 90%, maybe more, of the images that we see from, say, like Hubble or anything out of NASA, those images are color retouched, which isn't to say that they don't present a strict image of what the universe looks like, but they are adjusted so as to be a pleasing and interesting vision of space, right? Because NASA, they don't release those images to us as the scientific community. We're not looking for scientific accuracy. We're looking for nice looking pictures of space we can use as our phone background, right? So Stellaris pulls us into that space immediately. And we've talked before about how color and sort of palette theming can immediately associate us with certain things, right? Camouflage immediately makes us think that something is focused on the military. Colors in particular palette shifts lead us to attach those things to particular fiction. So to me, the choice to make this that sort of visible spectrum, NASA marketing, blue, kind of blue and gold, teal and amber kind of cinematic space is an intentional choice, right? To say, like, this is a bit realistic. It has the look of images of space you are used to. Now, the reason I say that it's realistic is ignoring the space station. We'll get to that. But if we had here an immediate image of a bunch of very alien-looking creatures, if we had a big blowy, like, Chris Foss space battle, if it looked more psychedelic, it would imply to us that the game is different than it is, right? What it's trying to present is a universe with which we are already familiar. It's meant to cement us in at least a semi-serious scientific space. And then to contrast that, we have this matte painting, watercolory looking, blue glowing space station, which does look a bit alien, a bit sci-fi, but I wouldn't say that it's over the top. Like, it doesn't really counteract the sort of gentle pseudo-reality of the background, right? Like, what we're given here is, yes, there is future tech. Because I think if you took out the spaceships and you took out the space station itself, there may not be any kind of human or human-esque creatures in the universe, right? This could just be a space exploration simulator with no life at all. So what it's doing is saying, like, yes, here is the universe as you know it, in the sense of stars, nebulae, familiar images in terms of that background, but we're going to twist it a little bit, and the universe as you do not know it, here's a sort of alien-looking space station. Now, it's a smart choice here to make it kind of neutrally sci-fi. Like, that space station isn't a insectoid alien hive. It's not a clunky kind of swan song-esque, like Firefly-looking sort of junk station. The ships are just dots of color that move in and out very slowly. So it allows us to project or to wonder what kind of species built that, which is good because the next immediate thing that we roll into is we create our own empire, right? So it's a nice sort of blank palette for us to imprint our own game onto, but sets the stage as being a fairly sort of intuitive knowledge of space. We know that this is going to take place in a space we at least have some basic understanding of. Now, in terms of the gravity, pun not intended, of the screen, the screen's whole gravity is pulled very much up to the top. This is almost like two title screens. We have this kind of wide screen. Like, you could reframe this in a different aspect ratio and cut out the bottom and still have a really solid title screen. It's interesting because all of the boring shit is jammed down at the bottom. Now, a couple of things before we talk about the Stellaris, like, font and title choice, but a couple of things that pull me out of this are the unusual use of, like, that orangey yellow kind of color that they use for the menu down here. I get that it's meant to stand out, but all it really does is kind of, like, it tweaks it a little. You don't see that color anywhere else except the powered by Clausewitz gear. So there's a bit of a weird incongruity there. Like, I would have preferred that the titles were all white. I get that they're illustrating to us that there's a hotkey. We can just hit M. But then why also give us the tooltip? Right? Like, yes, I know S is for settings. You put it in gold. Why unless it's teaching us the tooltip, the way to expect tooltips to look later. We'll see. We'll have to look at the internal UI of the game versus the title screen UI. The other thing that I found a bit jarring, besides this Clausewitz engine here, because I think it's a little out of place. But I get that it's the engine of the game, so you know they want to include it. But color-wise, it throws me off a little bit. The other thing is the repeat of the Paradox Development Studio logo and Paradox Interactive down here. That seems a weird choice, especially this one. This seems a bit egregious. I would have been okay with just the Paradox Interactive logo. It's under my shoulder here. You can't really see it. So I don't really know why they needed to brand it twice. Like, in case you didn't know that, I guess Paradox Interactive and Paradox Development Studio are two different companies, technically. But I don't know. It feels like a little overloaded. I suppose that if Paradox Interactive published it and a different company developed it, then that's fine. But at this point, I think that a Paradox Interactive and Paradox Development Studio production logo would have been sufficient, and this feels like it's breaking up that top-bottom balance. We don't need this up here, especially in that color and in that texture. It doesn't fit with the rest of the screen. It's a little sloppy. Now, I will say, inversely, this is a beautiful title. It stands out marvelously. The drop shadow separates it from the background, which allows them to use the same white and green palette for the image and the planet. I hate this trademark. I understand why it's there, but I fucking hate it. It also, to me, really speaks to Stellaris, the films, I guess. I'm trying to find an example of the title page for those. Yeah, right. It's in a very sci-fi font. It looks like Stellaris and Stellaris. For the longest time, I would get the two mixed up. Stellaris is a film, a Tarkovsky film, and then there was a remake, and it's also novels. But I wonder, as far as the title of the game itself goes, like, this is a pretty standard, like, sci-fi font. I quite like it. I think it's spaced nicely. I think that its kerning is good. It's a great choice. The color, everything about the title is good. There's a temptation to make the title itself stand out more aggressively, but I love that it's subtle and it feels like a part of here. But the name of the game, naming it Stellaris, I have to wonder if the developers intentionally chose the name to make us think of Stellaris, or if it was a coincidence because one is a sun and one is a star, and they pretty much just kind of like flow together in the same milieu. Now, I think, and I wanna just sort of as a last note here, I think that a title, the purpose of a title screen is not necessarily to impart to us everything that we should expect from a game, right? That's not its purpose. Its purpose is to compel us both to play the game, right? It's to drive us into the game itself. And it is there to, at the very least, intrigue us about what the game might be about. Unlike buying a book or seeing the poster for a film, usually when we see the title screen for a video game, we've already bought it. They've already got us. So it works functionally as a different sort of object, a less commercial object. It's to sort of pull us into the game world and set the stage for what we are going to expect. I will say this about the kinetic element of the title screen, because people have noticed in the chat, and I'd be remiss not to mention it, there's motion in this title screen, and it is glacial, right? We're not moving, but gently the universe is moving. The universe is moving around us. which that sort of glacial pace is absolutely something that this title screen imparts from the game. So this is Stellaris, a Paradox development studio production, produced and published by Paradox Interactive, which is back behind me here, and we are going to give it a shot. Let's see what Stellaris has to offer, shall we?